So welcome to this evening's deliberative forum and roundtable discussion on income and wealth disparities. Should we address them? And if so, why and how? My name is Graham Bullock, and I am a professor of political science and also the faculty director of the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative here at Davidson College. The DCI for short is happy to be hosting this event with three student organizations, the Davidson College Democrats, the Davidson College, thank you, Caillou, the Davidson College Republicans, I think Stephen is in a breakout room. So yeah, so there's kind of unfair advantage there. And then also the Center for Political Engagement, which is an umbrella organization for all political student organizations on campus. And then also three academic departments, the Department of Economics, Philosophy, and political science. So we're really happy and want to maybe give a round of applause for all the co-sponsors of this event tonight. This is our 14th overall forum and fourth in-person format forum, and we're really excited to be able to host these events in person. We started these 5 years ago, 2020, and they were all obviously on Zoom. And it's only been the last year or two that we've been able to do them in person and have a live and in-person panel. So it's exciting for us that we can have this in-person event, but also be welcoming all of our friends online. So I can't see how many, but we had over 200 people signed up for this event tonight, and almost equal numbers of in-person and online registrants. So it's really exciting to have this hybrid format where we can do both, welcome people on campus, but also people from around the country, if not the world. So before we get started, I'd like to ask you to complete a short survey that is on your tables. You should see a QR code that's in green, the pre-event survey. So take a picture, scan that, and you'll have a really short little survey. It's part of our research. There's a little consent form in how it's an effort to improve our processes, our forums. And so please fill that out. We'll have another one at the end that's on the back with a red link. And then you'll also be receiving a link in the chat from our DCI Assistant Director, Willow Paul. So watch out for that, and please click on it and complete that survey. So before we begin, I just wanted to share a little bit about the DCI, which you can learn more about on our website, the deliberativecitizenship.org. Our purpose is to create opportunities like this for Davidson students and faculty and staff and members of our broader community to really engage with each other on the most challenging and contentious and important topics facing our society and our communities. And so we're really happy that you're here to join us in this effort. And it's true that for sure, this question of whether and how we should address economic inequality is one of these issues. As well-meaning and well-informed people can differ about, I wish I hold this closer, about the benefits and drawbacks of different strategies of addressing economic and income and wealth disparities, and whether to do so at all. So we have here today an amazing panel to help us understand and explore these diverse perspectives. And we've paired this fantastic panel with an opportunity for all of you, both in person and online, to talk with each other about these questions. And we have about 30 trained DCI facilitators here with us, either in person or online, to lead us in those conversations. And they're gonna walk you through the guide, the deliberation guide that we shared with you beforehand. And there are a couple copies on the table. And then for friends online, maybe they're in one of the million emails that I sent you over the last week. So you can call that up. And I do want to recognize right now our facilitators, at least who are in the room. If you could just stand up, our DCI fellows who are here, so you know who they are, and give them a round of applause. And I also want to recognize our online facilitators who are standing by to facilitate your breakout room conversations. And then all of this work, this online work in particular, is being coordinated by Willow Paul, and also Adam Barton, Davidson's digital events manager, and Ryan Clark from Davidson's tech services department. So I want to give a round of applause for all of them for their assistance. And then, as you know, tonight is an event that's free of charge. We didn't collect any money at the door, but the only thing we do ask is that you join the small group discussions after the panel. These discussions are actually the purpose of this event. And the panel is designed to catalyze your conversations with your fellow citizens. And so they're a great opportunity for you to both express your own ideas and questions while listening to those of others in your group. So please stick around for the full 2 hours. I think you'll really find it rewarding. And especially friends online, the breakout rooms can be really great spaces for some fascinating discussions. So in the interest of time, because I want to turn it over to our panel in a moment, I'm not going to give extensive introductions of our panelists. We have it on our website. And then also on the pages, there's a bio page on the tables in front of you. Want to check out more about their backgrounds. And suffice to say, their expertise and experience is very relevant to today's topic. We have Robin Lake Hamilton, CEO and president of the Urban League of Central Carolinas. We have Jessica Flanagan, professor of leadership studies and philosophy, politics, economics, and law at the University of Richmond. We have Brian Balfour from the John Locke Foundation, where he is the senior vice president of research. And we have Sean McKeever from Davidson's own philosophy department. And then we also have Doug Hicks, class of 1990, president of Davidson College and professor of religious studies. And I've seen President Hicks moderate a good number of panels since he's been here at Davidson. And I've just been so impressed by how he's been able to spark really thoughtful, intentional, and authentic conversations on a whole wide range of topics. And he's particularly, I'm particularly excited about Doug being a facilitator, moderator tonight, because he also has expertise in this area. He's written a book on economic inequality and Christian ethics. And so I'm excited for President Hicks to be here with us. And I'm going to turn it over to him in just a moment. But a quick note about our format. So in the interest of encouraging our panelists to really engage with each other in conversation, this is the second time we've had this format of a table and not a row of chairs. And the idea is to have them really talking to each other, and you kind of are literally flies on the wall to listen to that conversation. And we have this technology in the middle of the table called an owl, which enables you to see everyone speaking as they're speaking, and our online friends are seeing that feed as well from Adam in the back. So, and the idea is that they're gonna model for us, a respectful and authentic exploration of both their areas of agreement and disagreement, and really show what a good argument can look like. And on that note, President Hicks, as our facilitator, may sometimes interrupt our panelists occasionally to keep the conversation going, and as your facilitators may around your tables or in your breakout rooms. It's not because President Hicks doesn't like what he's hearing, it's because he wants to open up the conversation and invite more people into it. And it's because each of our panelists could give a 2-hour presentation or more on this topic. And so we're trying not to have monologues, but more of a conversation. And just as we want in your conversations afterwards to be conversations. So with that, I want to turn it over to President Hicks. Thank you all for being here, and look forward to a great discussion.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We are really grateful to Professor Graham Bullock for his leadership on the DCI, his intellectual leadership and now organizational work to make this happen and to convene conversations like this. And all of you students, faculty, staff, and friends, whether you're local neighbors or neighbors from afar, we thank you for joining in this work. So we're not really about winning arguments tonight. We're about learning from each other. I hope that I learn a lot, and I hope that our panelists even learn something they didn't know or hadn't thought about from other panelists. We're also educators, and I'm really honored to be at the table with you four. You bring a lot of expertise to this issue, so let's jump in. I didn't want to cut off Professor Bullock, but let's just go. Let's just jump right in. So let me just start. Professor McKeever, why don't you start? And I'm going to ask the same question to each of you. Should we address income and wealth disparities? Should we address it? So I'm not going to get to the if so, then what should we do? Should we address these disparities in the economy?
Yes, we should. If you drive around North Carolina or take a walk and you notice the vast inequality between a wealthy piece of real estate 5 minutes from here, an impoverished neighbor in Charlotte, or an impoverished rural area 15 or 20 miles to our north, you might, as many people do, look at that and just not feel it's right or feel that there's something wrong there. And the first thing I want to say is there are many valid concerns for why you might look at that and say there's something the matter there, something we should address. One of them that I'm going to just set aside is the issue of poverty. Not because it's unimportant, but because it's not specifically about inequality. We can alleviate poverty without worrying about how much wealth there is above whatever poverty line we decide is important. Focusing on inequality, I want to be a spokesperson for one reason. It's not the only reason. So I want to also invite people to think about other reasons inequality matter. And I'll just start with a quick thing to relate that I hope all of our students can relate to, and any parent of a student will also be able to relate to, and I can relate to because my daughter is a college student, and in a year and a half, she's going to graduate. And I don't want her to come back and live at home. I want her to get a job, and I want her to make her way in the world. But the reason for that is not that she would not be well off if she lived at home. I'm fortunate enough. I have enough money. I have a good job. Her room is there. I could buy enough groceries for her. I'd even take her on vacation. But if she were to do that, both she and I would recognize that something had gone wrong, and you would too. She would not be able to develop as an independent person. She would be dependent upon me, and she would know that the place she sleeps and the food she eats is dependent on her relationship to me. And this would inhibit her in leading a full and free life. So this way of thinking about it, economic and material inequalities, whether we think about them in terms of income or wealth, matter because they inhibit our freedom and our ability to live as equals with other people. And it's not primarily about stuff. I have friends shared on social media, fantastic vacation to Mallorca. I was jealous. I was like, oh my gosh, that looks great. Maybe I could afford it, probably not, or it would be risky. I know people who live in bigger houses than I do. I actually don't think that's much of any problem at all for us, certainly not one we need to address. But what we need to address is economic and material inequalities insofar as they inhibit our ability to be independent and to live freely. And that's the why of it.
Terrific, thanks. So we're actually going to try to parse out the distinctions between income and wealth, and in fact, poverty and inequality. And I'm going to resist doing that now. I'm going to ask Professor Flanagan to jump in next. Should we care about economic inequalities?
So no, just to make a contrast class here, the problem isn't disparity. The problem is deprivation. And so Professor McKeever is saying, oh, well, we could address poverty and deprivation in an unequal society. And I agree. And that's the thing we should focus on. People should focus on building a society where everybody has enough and not a society where we minimize the gaps between the top and the bottom. And the reason is because the most prosperous societies are societies that both are the best way we have of securing everybody having enough, but also often have a great deal of inequality. And so prosperous societies are best for the poor, and they also produce billionaires and the ultra rich. So Professor McKeever was saying like, well, being dependent on somebody for a wage, you might think that that inhibits their freedom and autonomy, that that's not them having enough. If people have enough, I think that's sufficient. And we don't need to do anything else in terms of redistribution beyond trying to secure that the very worst off have enough. And a market, I think, is the best expression of a person's freedom and autonomy and like independence by exercising their economic freedom in the marketplace and innovating things like that. And it's also the best way we have of incentivizing people to help each other, ensuring that everyone has enough. And so instead of focusing on the rich and the poor and the gap and who has more than what, instead of focusing on the disparity, I think we should focus on the deprivation.
Okay, see some similarities, some differences. Let's go to Robin Lake Hamilton next. Should we care about economic inequalities?
Well, I was gonna talk about all kinds of stuff and now y'all done sent me down a different path thing. I'm like, wait, what? And I always want to win an argument. I think you should be prepared for that. So, that being said, of course we should care. And obviously I come from the perspective of, an African-American and a woman, living in the United States. I come from the perspective of someone who, has real life experience and proximity to, depraved areas and areas that don't seem to really have enough. And I also, come from it from a lens, ironically, I was in the military. And the inequities that you would believe that are happening to my fellow veterans, not just even after they leave service, but actually while they're in service. So, my perspective, comes from a variety of areas. For me, this is a heart question. My work is not as elaborate as my colleagues around the table. It's, I'm not a researcher. I'm not an academia. I'm not I don't do, I don't write books, but now my staff would say I can write a book. They're like, good gracious, this is the longest email ever. But, my perspective is as a practitioner, and since spending every day with people that are living with inequities and living in a lack of wealth. And I'll be honest with you, I rarely don't get to wealth. Typically, in a lot of scenarios, believe it or not, I'm stabilizing a family. We haven't even gotten to wealth. We're just, let's stabilize, let's address this issue. Then let's get you a sustainable solution, right? And then maybe at some point in time, someone can cover wealth with you, but it's usually not me. And, I won't get into necessarily all of the reasons why, because we have great time for conversation, but I go back to my statement that I believe the answer for me in that question, it's a heart question. Why would we not want equity? Why would we not want everyone to do well? I don't even understand why we would even have the question.
All right, a provocative question that we might get to. Brian Balfour.
Yeah. Thank you. So the original question was, should we address these differences in wealth and income? And my question is, who is the we in that statement? Number one. Number two, is that an institution or an organization that's equipped and capable of addressing them without doing more harm than good in that attempt to address those differences? And thirdly, I'll kind of hedge my answer a little bit. First off, I would echo the earlier statements here, but I think the concern should be more about the absolute well-being of those in society, in particular those on the lowest income scale in society. rather than focusing in on the differences between folks in income and wealth. So to the extent that these differences emerge naturally in a market economy based on voluntary transactions, entrepreneurs, the patterns of production and exchange that emerge in the economy where some earn more income than others, I don't think that should be a concern. I think there should be an eye towards when government intervenes and produces subsidies, political privileges for certain folks or industries or businesses to benefit at the expense of others. And then especially when we're talking about wealth differences, we can talk about, maybe we can get into this later, but the outsized role that the Federal Reserve plays in creating wealth differences based on their money printing and how that creates asset bubbles that increases the already wealthy investor class. We certainly should want to peel back those government interventions into our lives that create these differences.
Great. Given current inequalities in America, do you believe children born in the U.S. across the economic distribution have an equal chance at a flourishing life? In the current moment, do you believe children have an equal chance at flourishing? We start back with Jess.
When you ask, like, does everybody have an equal chance at flourishing? Of course not. And for a lot of reasons. People are born with all sorts of different tastes and talents that are going to suit them to provide different kinds of goods and services to people in the market. And people also are born into different environments where they have different levels of opportunity. So people are born at unequal starting positions, and they don't have equal opportunity to make the most of those starting positions in all cases, of course. One thing that's really nice about markets is that it enables people who have a diversity of tastes and talents and opportunities and abilities to be able to trade with people and exchange with people in a way that's going to make it so that other people are incentivized and induced to help them and to take care of them so that they can take care of themselves. And they're going to enable them to contribute to society as well. So it's not fair that everybody starts off in a different place. But the best way that we can respond to that unfairness is by giving everybody a chance to participate in an economy where they can try to like benefit their fellow citizens as much as they possibly can. And then other people have reason to try to trade with them and benefit them back.
Okay, we'll come back to that. How about you, Sean?
Yeah, I actually think there's a fair amount of common ground here.
Wait, we're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, I agree that obviously not everyone has an equal chance to flourish. I do think we need to create the conditions where each person can pursue their life as they see fit. So I'm actually resistant to even the idea that there's some single scale of flourishing that you could measure everyone, because different people have different priorities, and they should have the freedom to pursue and then also like live with the consequences of those. And I think markets are actually a great place to do that. So my outlook is actually quite in line with some of the points that Professor Flanagan, but I think we probably would disagree about what provisions need to be made in order for people to maintain their independence and to have a full range of appropriate choices. And that's probably where the disagreement between us would arise.
Great, Robin?
I believe you all had my wonderful colleague, Sherry Chisholm, from Leading on Opportunity. So just to kind of give you, Charlotte tends to have clutch your pearl moments when they get bad press. And we typically will get somebody to write a study, and we get two popular people, they raise a bunch of money, and we decide we're going to fix this problem. Hence, you know, the whole upward mobility as a result of the Raj Chetty study. Okay. So you all had a chance to talk with her, and they've done a whole expose, if you will. They've got a whole paper, a number of different papers written about, the inequalities, and that we don't all have, the same starting point. But what's even crazier is that your parents can be at a point and, we're 50 out of 50. Now purportedly we're 35, but 50 out of 50 in the ability for someone to even leave that status in life. So, you know, I believe something's terribly wrong. I mean, I feel as though we should all be able to impart to our children, hopefully, we know better, you should do better, right? That's usually what you want. You want to see, your children go on and do more, and have that. And so, when you look at the study, there's nothing riveting. There's no surprises, right? Early education, if you have, poor early education, it's going to be a problem, right? If you live in a zip code, with what I refer to as concentrated poverty, where around other people that don't have any opportunities, there lies, your perspective in life. So that becomes, one of the issues that we've talked about, social capital continues to be a conversation that we talk about. I mean, relationships, I will tell you, are everything. College students, your relationship time that you're spending here at school, your relationship building is everything. And can have a huge impact on what happens when you leave here. So again, if your relationships and you don't have that social capital to either give you perspective, or even if you have the perspective to open up the door and get you access, it's just, you're flatlined and you really can't move, and you don't know why you're not moving, which creates a whole nother different dynamic of frustration.
So just some context, Robin's talking about the Raj Chetty study on social mobility. It was about a decade ago that 50 metro areas, Charlotte ranked 50 of 50 in terms of ability to move. This is an empirical study, move from the lower decile up further in the income distribution. And now we're in the 35 or high 30s.
Yeah.
And it's real progress,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't see a lot of Charlotte business folks saying, we're number 35.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it is serious progress, because Leading on Opportunity and other organizations have worked hard on this.
Yeah.
How about you, Brian? And then I'm going to open it up to questions, and we don't have to all go around, but give you a chance on this one.
Yeah, sure. So of course, not everyone has an absolute equal opportunity. People are not equal to each other. People are not the same. They have different skills, they have different strengths, they have different interests, they have different priorities, different appetites for risk. So to expect similar outcomes amongst large groups of people is highly unrealistic. I mean, studies have been done. Siblings, older versus younger siblings are found to have vastly different outcomes. I mean, these are folks raised in the same household, born of the same parents, sharing the same DNA, and even they experience significant differences into adulthood. One significant equalizer, some of the social science has been looking a little bit more closely at in recent years is called the success sequence. And what that is basically get a high school education, work full time, and then marry before having children. And social scientists, in particular, there's one study out of the University of Virginia that did a longitudinal study that found that millennials who followed that sequence, 97% of them managed to escape poverty. That's 97%, and that cuts across racial, ethnic demographics. Even amongst children who were born in the lowest income households, 94% of them who follow that sequence when they became adults were able to climb out of poverty. So the template is there for how to escape poverty, for how to have a solid middle class or better life. But certainly, I think it's unrealistic given human nature to expect to have no differences in financial well-being of people as they grow up, because of the great diversity of how humans are.
Okay, serious intellectual question with real life applications. I've been waiting for a panel with experts to ask this question, and for me, it gets to a lot of what we're talking about. So the libertarians argue, and others will say, the image is a race. We're running a human race, and we all line up at a starting point. And if we all have a kind of equal starting point, then outcomes are going to be different, because people might be faster than others, or have longer legs, or be better at running the course, or have better vision. But how do we think about that as an intuitive form of justice? Like, everybody gets a fair shot and then we go. with the reality of historic and systemic inequalities. Like there hasn't been a moment where African Americans have caught up or had an equal moment. You know, our school was segregated till 63. And, you know, I'm not interested in an oppression narrative or a victim narrative, but there's a reality that whites have always been ahead of blacks and men have always been ahead of women in the workplace. And so there are certain systemic realities that go against this idea that there was ever this idealistic or hypothetical starting place. And so I heard some consensus that the market can be a powerful mechanism, that also that helping people out of basic deprivation is a good. But what do we do with this fact that Americans have never had an equal playing field from which to start? And I could say more to defend that, but I hope I don't have to. So I'll start, and we don't all have to answer every question now, but who's got energy around this one?
I don't think that society is a race. And I think thinking about society like a race is a bad way to think about society, because it sort of poisons your heart against your fellow citizens, because you start viewing them as competitors in a zero-sum competition where them winning is your loss. But society is not like that. And that's not how markets are. Markets are positive sum. And so when you and I trade, there's a gain from trade and we both benefit. So it's not the case that when we participate in the economy, my benefit comes at your expense. When we freely trade, that means that like you're selling something to me because I value it and I'm giving you the money to induce you to sell it to me. And so it's a positive sum interaction. And if we think about society in that way, the thing we want is to have as many gains from trade as possible, right? We really want to make it so that we have as much benefit from working together instead of viewing each other as competitors. And that's why we should focus on, you know, imagining society not like a race, but like a pie. And we want the pie to be as big as possible. We want as much productivity as we can generate. And it just happens to be that there seems to be a brutal trade-off in modern economies between the size of the pie and the egalitarian of the distribution of the pie. Because when you redistribute resources within it, often it's a disincentive for people to trade and have those positive sum exchanges. And so what I'm saying is it's better for the worst off, and it's better for the rest of us too, if we have a big pie philosophy, instead of thinking about society like a race and trying to redistribute that pie to make it more equal, thus shrinking the total size of the pie.
So let's use a monopoly image then, to use a capitalist image. And let's say we start with monopoly and we can gain from trade from each other, but one person starts with $1,500 and one person starts with $5. Maybe that's a better image for you. But what do we do about the starting points that are so different, assuming that trade can help everybody, but it's starting from a massively unequal situation?
Well, I said before that I think that we should focus on the person who doesn't have enough, and that the best way to help that person have enough is still going to be to have a system that allows, for the most part, free trade. And also, a lot of the people who talk about unequal starting points or disparities in wealth and income, their solution to it is going to be redistributive taxation. And I just think that is a terrible way of thinking about it for the following reason. Well, I'll just take a vibe check. How many people in the room, just a show of hands, think we should have more progressive redistributive taxation? We should have more, great. Do you think that like when you're making money or if you make money now, you should have a higher tax rate too? Yeah, good. Good news. You can donate your money right now to the US Treasury. That's an available option for you. Does anybody think that giving their money to the US Treasury is going to be the best way for them to help the poorest people on earth, much less like the poorest citizens here? Like the poorest people on earth get no money from US taxation. The poorest US citizens get basically Medicaid. That's like the only major spending category in the federal budget. Most of that money is going, number one, basic income for old people, Social Security. Number two, Medicare. 3, Department of Defense, interest on the debt. That's where the money's going. So if you think that the way to address unequal starting points and disparities in the United States is by redistributive taxation, look at what the federal government is spending its money on, and then decide for yourself whether you want to write an additional little check for the US Treasury is your favorite charity to help the poor. I don't think you would.
All right, thanks. Sean.
Yeah, so now we're going to disagree. I mean, although I want to start, there is a point of agreement, which we really should think about growing costs. That is, it isn't a zero-sum game, and I totally agree with Professor Flanagan, that it is not a zero-sum game and we should be focused on growing the pie. But that's actually in conflict with the idea that pursuing equality requires redistribution. Because the future pie, the bigger pie, doesn't belong to anyone yet. It's yet to be created. So decisions need to be made about how that bigger pie is going to be shared. Now, that decision is going to be made in any kind of market society based on agreements and trades and contracts. Of course. But those contracts are going to depend upon bargaining power. And so this idea that, like, if you're not poor, if you have enough, then you're like good to go and you just make your choices and you make your contracts. That overlooks the power of bargaining power in the nature of the agreements that are going to divide the bigger pie that we all want. So there are two separate questions. One question is whether we should pursue equality. It's a quite separate question how much we should redistribute to achieve that. If by redistribution you mean taking stuff away that people already have an entitlement to and giving it to someone else through taxation. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay.
So, okay. It's hard for me not to come from a lens of the reality of oppression, systemic oppression, and for whatever the minority community is, as well as women. So, I will tell you that that's just something that it's not different. I don't think that, and when you say, when we were talking about race, I'm not sure if we were referring to as an ethnic race or just a race in general.
Oh, I think you meant like a
race,
like a foot race.
Like a foot race, yeah,
Yeah.
to get there. But when you said that, I was like, wait, what?
No.
So,
she was
like, no.
Yeah.
So, and obviously not to come from, wanting to come from that same perspective as well. The thing keeps playing in my mind is like, who gets to decide on this pie? Because at the end of the day, whether it's the future pie or the current pie, when you think about who's in position to decide how this pie gets divvied up, you don't have the balance to give perspective on the pie, right? This is kind of how we got here. And so I always go to that because that becomes a significant issue, again, about why we continue to stay in this space, why we don't tend to grow from this space. And we've talked about it, and I think we would agree around this table that the wealth disparity has grown exponentially. And, they're clearly going to be the policymakers of the future and have impact on policy and certainly pie distribution.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be, we have to be realistic about that. That's the reason, I have a challenge with that. I don't think you'll find most people will say, we need to take this from one person, take something they have and give it to another person. I don't believe that is definitely not the vein at which many civil rights organizations, which by the way, civic rights has always been about economic rights, would tell you is what the goal is, right? The goal might even be that we would love to be able to create parity, right? You've got 30% of African-Americans in, say, North Carolina, I'm just making these numbers up. And of that 30%, maybe they do make up 30% of the spend with government contracts, right? I mean, something of that nature. I don't know. There's been dialogue about that. You guys have heard the dialogue around reparations, right? I don't know that, believe it or not, as many people support reparations as you think, just because of the reality of how do you actually really do that. So you have all of these different ways of how you wind up getting there. But I think one of the most important things that we will have to have a clarity on is, that definition of making sure everyone does well. And what does well look like, and who gets to decide on what well is. And it just continues to be, right, this ongoing challenge with trust, right?
Do you want to add?
Sure, I'll just, you're bringing up the question on who gets to decide who does well. It should be us, the people, as market participants, right? We get to choose who
Surely you meant as citizens, right, Brian?
I think you meant market participants.
Well, no,
Oh, just us four?
no,
Go ahead.
well, let me finish. As market participants, right, we get to choose what products and services that we buy to fulfill our wants and needs, and we get to choose the producer of that. And if someone is satisfying our wants and needs and desires and offering us products at a price we're willing to pay, they should be rewarded for that. And kind of buttressing the point, an exchange only takes place when both parties benefit because of it. So you go and you buy, say, a cell phone for whatever, how much they cost these days, $800. You don't purchase that cell phone because you value the phone the same as $800. You value that cell phone more than the $800 you're giving up in exchange for it. Likewise, the company's doing the same. They're valuing your $800 more than that selling that marginal cell phone to you. So it's a win-win exchange. And for in a market economy, for people to grow wealthy, they need to make the lives of their fellow people, citizens, if you will, better. That's how companies, that's how organizations grow wealthy, is because they are offering a product and service to people, to the masses of people who willingly and voluntarily make their lives better by purchasing their products. You don't get rich in a market economy. You can get rich through political favoritism by making others worse off, by leveraging and lobbying the government for political favors to put your competitors out of business, perhaps, as one example. But in a pure market economy, without that government's thumb on the scale, those that get rich, that reap the benefits, are the ones that make the most of other people's lives better.
Well, I didn't expect to ask this question, but I'll ask. Which is more primary, being a citizen or being a a market participant? We'll go around.
Well, I would say market participant, because markets deliver, markets solve problems. A citizen, to me, is kind of implying someone who's participating in the political system. What problems has politics solved?
I actually think the answer just has to be citizens, because markets don't create themselves. Markets exist and function in a legal structure, and that legal structure needs to be settled and agreed upon. People need to buy into it. People need to comply with it. We need institutions to enforce it. And without that, you would not have a functioning market. So I would say for that reason, although I think markets are terrific institutions, the role of a citizen, or the political task, is more fundamental, because without solving certain political questions, you don't get a market, or you don't get the kind of market you'd want in the first place.
Markets exist. There's black markets out there. There's markets pre-existed governments. I mean, I don't understand this concept that we need a government for people to willingly engage in trade. People engage in trade voluntarily all the time outside of any sort of political apparatus or institution. I mean, you can go trade with your neighbor. You can go mow your neighbor's lawn. That's an exchange.
I take the point in that's correct. But we wouldn't trade the legally governed market we have for anarchic black market, where the enforcement of contracts was up to private individuals.
Time.
Yeah.
Can I address Robin's point about race and gender disparities?
Sure. Great. We'll keep moving. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I just wanted to circle back to it because Robin brought up, look, like society is structured in a way where we see disparities in wealth and income across lines of race and gender. And I agree. And sometimes I think that does reflect different preferences. So I think when it comes to disparities between men and women in the marketplace, yeah, sometimes that reflects different preferences over how much caregiving to take on, or maybe it's socialized, maybe it's, inherent. Maybe it's just related to like pregnancy. But I think people might make different choices based on their identity categories, but sometimes it just reflects straight up discrimination, racism, right? And that's not fair. Now the question is, how should those income and wealth inequalities be addressed? And I think oftentimes public officials who intervene with the market to try to address those policies do it in a way that's actually really counterproductive for the people that they're trying to help. So for example, in a racist society, workers are still competing for labor. And one way that they can compete if they're being discriminated against is by competing on price. And that's not fair. that they would have to compete based on price because they're subject to discrimination. They could be just as productive as other workers. It's totally unfair. But having a minimum wage floor that prevents like low wage workers, teenagers, formerly incarcerated people from being able to compete for jobs on price is just going to lock them out of the economy further by taking away an option that they would have valued given everybody else's discriminatory preferences without really addressing the underlying discrimination at the cause. Similarly, a lot of social support programs that are means tested can keep people out of the formal economy, thus preventing them from developing valuable human capital, which is necessary for economic mobility, or housing policy that aims to prevent
Okay, let's
gentrification.
stop with that one.
I'm just going to say gentrification
Yeah.
prevents people from building wealth in low-income segregated communities. And so even though there's a lot of unfairness in society that we see reflected in the market, it doesn't follow that restricting the market is going to help redress those types of inequalities.
I don't know if that, for me, it's a conversation about restricting the market. So, to answer your question earlier, I go between people in the market, but I'm like, there's no market without the people. So, a part of me feels like, you know what, government broke it, the market broke it, figure out how to fix it.
Yeah.
So I don't have a problem with that. How are you gonna fix it, right? And I tell people sometimes the simplest way, just what you did for the past 50 years, just reverse that dramatically,
Right.
right? So where folks were specifically cut out, specifically put them in. And I think that that's where you see those solutions where people think about it. They're like, oh, well, we discriminated, but let's figure out, some policies that are dramatically different than what we did with redlining, right? And things of that nature. So, that has been a way of fixing it. And so I don't, I will tell you, a lot of folks will say that are in this particular industry, social services industry and industry, and what you see in not-for-profits will tell you that that's the total way of necessarily fixing something. But that is a way of making, some adjustments that probably need to be made and figuring out how to get there, right? We don't have the luxury in this world to just say, okay, let's all just start from today, right? And go forward, right? We know that that's not going to be different. And again, so many of, I think a lot of the policies and things that were put in place, again, were put in place to remedy some of the extremes that happen, whether it be Jim Crow laws. And I tell people, I was like, there was inequality before slavery, right? I mean, so this has gone on for very long. We didn't create it. So, you have to figure out a way, what's the best way forward to remedy, because we know how we got here. Oh, let's just do the opposite for a little while, right? And so that seems to be what's natural. I don't know where there's some instances where I agree with you where it hasn't helped, or could have been more helpful if done, I think, a little bit differently and thought through a little bit differently about the market. I often feel like a lot of times the conversation and arguments had around, for example, things like affirmative action or supplier diversity, and things that we don't get to the value proposition. We don't get to the business value proposition. And so folks just think it's some sort of like feel good or handout, right? As opposed to, it might be a hand up, but it's not at the expense typically of somebody else. There's just a rhetoric out there that that's the case, and that's not the case. We have to typically talk to like, for example, if we're having this conversation, and I'm having this conversation in a boardroom in Charlotte, I'm really generally not coming at it, and most folks aren't coming at it from the perspective like it's the right thing to do. It just doesn't work, right? I mean, if you've been in this space long enough, it doesn't work, right? You're having conversations about the economic value because that's what people understand.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's how do you have a conversation about the value proposition of what the economy could look like if we have parity,
Right.
if we have these 60 people who I know for a fact are going to be coming home from prison, right? And instead of knowing they're not going to have housing, knowing they're not going to have transportation, but yet we're going to have all these expectations of them society. Let's be realistic about putting the necessary guards in place and support in place to give them what they need, right? But there's an economic value to that. So it's not just for them, it's for us. And having the conversation in that way, I think is probably not as often heard. But again, you know, we always hear the sound bites and the pretty stuff and the things that's going to get everybody in an uproar versus the business conversation and the
I
economic
love what
conversation.
you're saying, because it's like, that's how I just feel like we're just leaving so much money on the table
Mhm.
by not looking at the market conversation, because
Yep.
there's so much value and productivity that's being locked out of the economy.
Mhm.
And then when we make these policies that further lock people out of the economy, it
Mhm.
only entrenches these attitudes of thinking that people don't have anything to offer in the economy, but like they do.
That
And so just
absolutely do.
unlock that productivity. And
Mhm.
so that's why I favor more market oriented approach, even in
Yep.
these types of cases.
So let me ask the folks who were more concerned when we started about economic inequality. And our colleagues have made a claim about the efficiency equity trade-off. So, you know, Arthur Oaken's famous idea that, you know, that if you try to reduce inequalities, you're going to add inefficiencies into the market. Like, do you acknowledge that? And to what extent is that acceptable in order to lessen severe inequalities?
I wouldn't claim I assume there are trade-offs. I mean, when I go to any question, I assume that there's not a free lunch, that there are going to be trade-offs. How severe the trade-offs are is an empirical question, which I think is very uncertain. We should turn to our economists. We also look at historians and sociologists. We should look to social science to get our bearings. But I think our knowledge of exactly the magnitude of the trade-offs is uncertain. But I'll come back to a point that I started with, which is I don't think the overriding sole job of our social organization is to make us as wealthy as possible so we can all go to Mallorca for our vacation. That's not what we organize society to do. So I wouldn't be hesitant to make some trade-offs, but I'm not a purist, I'm a pragmatist. So like, I want people to be more free, more independent, more able to live their own lives. And I think we can structure the economy better to make that happen. Might it come at the cost of some growth? It could, but there's also a lot of untapped potential, right? So I don't know exactly what the trade-offs would be.
Great.
So, yeah, I'm certainly I'm for trade-offs. I mean, yes, there's going to be trade-offs. We have to recognize that things are not going to be, you know, perfect or balanced all the time. But I don't see a path forward where we don't create the environment for those trade-offs and talk about it in a way, again, where there's value, right? That's the conversation. Is, like I said, there's so much mis or disinformation about the value of having a society, right, where everyone benefits, that it's so much easier for us to be lazy and believe that there's a problem with this, that there's a challenge to this. And there's not. There's not. Like you said, we talk about the pie often, and, you know, everybody's going to get a piece of the pie, and everybody's worried about how big is my piece going to be, and mine didn't have cherries in it, and, you know, whatever it is. Everyone's worried about that, but we don't really have a conversation and show how, when all boats rise, or the tide rises, and then the tide rises, all boats rise. We don't have that conversation nearly as much because, you know, offense to my economist, it's boring, right? Nobody wants to hear about, really wants to hear about that. But I think that we have to start changing the narrative around these conversations so that we can hear. And can I just discourse thing? This is the way we should do it. Where's my facilitators? This is the way we should do this more often.
I don't know. I'm agreeing with all
To
of
sort-
this.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? To be able for people to hear you, as opposed to, instead of you getting, you know, some soundbite.
It's awesome, and I can't believe our time is flying away. But I want to do a lightning round, as we talked about when we
Do
asked
it.
last week. So I've asked you to contain yourselves to one sentence. Are you for this, and why? A minimum wage.
I'm against it because I don't think that public officials should constrain what kind of jobs should people take and the terms and condition of their labor. And if you can work for free, which is volunteering, you should be able to work for any wage you decide.
Absolutely, we should have a minimum wage. There's no reason why we should not have have a minimum wage, and people should be able to live a respectable, reasonable life. And that's only going to be probably driven by having a minimum wage.
I would say no, the minimum wage does not create a single job. It only outlaws jobs.
I would say yes. I think that the evidence that a minimum wage reduces jobs is uncertain, so I'll take the sure thing.
No, that's pretty
I'll
sure.
take the sure thing.
Okay.
There's a few things economists agree on. One of them is the effect of minimum wage.
It changes the demographic mix of jobs if it doesn't
Yeah.
reduce employment. Sorry.
Okay,
This is-
we're getting into empirical debates that pass the 1 cent. Okay, taxes, should we have a progressive tax in actual, what people actually pay? Should it be progressive? Meaning the proportion of a person's income in a given year is higher for the higher incomes than it is for the lower incomes.
I would rather us, before we get there, so I won't say yes or no to that. Look at, I know, I'm mailing out. I would rather us look at, labor taxes. And is there something that we could do there with labor tax and reducing the amount of money that we're taking out from those that really, we don't have to take that much money from them.
Okay,
I don't love income tax. I like land value, that kind of thing. But if you're gonna have an income tax, yeah, I think it's fine to have it fairly progressive because of the diminishing marginal value of money. And I like the ideas of a negative income tax like Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek had, where you just bounce it back for low earners to get a basic income off of the negative tax rate. But I don't think that it should be unlimitedly progressive. So some progressivity in a tax is fine, but
do you want some incentive?
limits. Yeah, maintain
across?
incentives.
Okay,
If it's on an income, it should be progressive. If it's on wealth, it could be flat.
I would say, well, number one, I would like to see taxes as low as humanly possible.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I don't think income tax should be progressive because it punishes productive behavior. And when you punish that productive behavior, it disincentivizes investment, and investment and productivity is the only way to watch or to see poverty recede in society. So when you try to soak the rich, you end up drowning the poor in reality.
that was an impressively long sentence. Okay.
One
One more question, which seems apropos for this moment. And, it may be challenging the market and a help yourself perspective. So I'm interested what each of the four of you has to say. Should the government step in with disaster relief, such as given the needs in Western North Carolina? Or name your hurricane. Because that's creating a massive disparity right now, of people whose fortunes were wiped out.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, other than that, then what? We just leave it dirty? I mean, we just leave it in a mess? I mean, think about it.
Well,
Yeah.
there's an argument that people should have gotten insurance. I'm trying to think through the arguments.
Yeah.
I think local charities and boots on the ground and charity, voluntary charity is far more efficient than government. Oftentimes government just swoops in and they start getting in the way.
I think that there is a moral hazard to overly providing too much relief without incentivizing people to get insurance. But that said, government can play a legitimate function in providing some kinds of public goods like public safety. And in North Carolina, however, there are counterproductive policies that are enforced by the government, such as anti-price gouging laws, which not only lock people out of getting necessary goods and services in this way, but then the government doesn't provide them either because we have an undersupply of government aid. And so the government's not helping people and is preventing the market from doing it too. That's the worst of both worlds.
Thanks. This is a fabulous panel. You all have talked about the appropriate role of the government. What does it take for a flourishing life? We've talked about independence and autonomy. We've talked about well-being. We've talked about enlarging the pie. We didn't get a lot to the difference between poverty or the deprivation at the bottom and inequality, which I'll just say one point. Inequality talks about the social relational nature of people living in society. So the question is, do we think about how we are one society together? And for me, that would be another angle to add into the inequality discussion that the poverty or deprivation piece doesn't get to fully. But I appreciate all four of you and the perspectives you offered. And why don't we give them a round of applause?
Thank you. Thank you.
And so that's it. I think we'll end there. We'll hang out a little bit if you have questions or follow up, but thank you all for being here and thank you for being here online. So take care.